Welcome to our lecture on the functional anatomy of the female reproductive tract. This presentation was adapted from the lecture of Dr. John Parrish, a reproductive physiology professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, from his presentation about the reproductive physiology of the female domestic animals. So this lecture shall aim to determine the anatomy of the different components of the reproductive tract of the cow, and also it aims to determine the salient features of these components as well as its functions. So let's take a look at these different species and think about why do they have different number of young born. For cow, the norm is one calf born. For goats, of course, we have 2 to 3 kids. For pigs, now the usual litter is about 12 to 14 to 18 piglets. For horses, 1. For primates, as is in this orangutan, so the usual, of course, it varies, but the norm is 1 as well as in humans. So in this presentation, we are going to answer why is this the case? So why other animals have a larger litter compared to other animals based on their reproductive tract anatomy. For example, based on the anatomy of the different segments of the female reproductive tract. We're going to discuss the different segments of the female reproductive tract. Let us first have a review of some terms that we are going to use when we are going to study the female reproductive tract. So of course, for horses, the technical term for horses are equines, and a male horse is a stallion, and a female is a mare. For cattle or bovine, we have bull and cow. Or ovine, we have the male ram, and for the female adult sheep, we have the ewe. For swine or pig, it is also known as porcine. Of course, a male adult pig is a boar, and a female adult pig is a sow. We also have a terminology, the hog. When we say hog, that is swine weighing more than 120 pounds. But this term is also applied generally to all swine. For chickens or avian, of course, we have the rooster and the hen. A male dog is called a dog. If he's used for breeding purposes, it is called a stud, or when referring to his puppies, it is called a sire. A female dog used for breeding is called a dam, D-A-M, or a bitch. For cats or feline, a female is a queen, male is a dog. So let's have first a short quiz about some important terminologies when we are going to study the the reproductive anatomy of the different domestic animals. Of course, we are going to encounter these different terminologies. So we have to be familiarized, or we have to review these terms. So we have here some terms, and we are going to list the equivalent names for this in the female. So we have here bovine, equine, porcine, and canine. So of course, when we say bovine, it refers to cattle, equine for horses, porcine for pigs, and canine for dogs. These are the answers now for our short quiz. For bovine, the name for the female under this category, or under these animals, are of course we have the cow and the heifer. So of course, when we say heifer, that is a female that has not had any offspring. The term usually refers to immature females for cattle. So after giving birth to her first calf, however, a heifer becomes a cow. So most heifers will reach puberty and be bred by 12 to 14 months of age and will be between 55 to 65% of their mature weight when they first begin to exhibit a true cycle. For equines, we have the mare and the filly. How do we differentiate the two? So a female horse under 4 years of age is called a filly. A female horse over the age of 4 years is called a mare. For pigs, we have the sow and the gilt. So a sow is a female pig that has already had a litter, and a gilt is a female pig that has not had a litter. So therefore, a gilt can be a pregnant animal up until its first litter. So when it has already farrowed its first litter, the gilt becomes a sow. For canines, we have the bitch. Come back to our question of why the number of young born differs among species. The key lies in the reproductive tract anatomy and physiology. Let's examine first the reproductive anatomy of the female cattle or cow. Is a typical diagram of a female reproductive tract from within outward or from the ovary. The parts are, of course, we have here, let's start with the ovary. Then we have the oviduct. This portion here is the oviduct. Then we have the uterus. The uterus has a uterine horn and a uterine body. After the uterus, we have the cervix, the vagina. We have also the vulva, and some parts that can be found here are the urethra, and the clitoris. On a lateral view, so this is now the reproductive tract of the cow. So of course we have here the ovary, then the oviduct. This is the uterus, and this is the horn, the body of the uterus, and we have here the cervix, the vagina, and the external genitalia. So of course it is associated with the rectum on the dorsal side, and we also have here the urinary bladder. So in examining the reproductive tract of a cow, one of the most prominent structure is the broad ligament. So the broad ligament is a connective tissue sheath which supports and suspends the reproductive tract. So the reason the reproductive tract does not just flop down in the pelvic cavity is that it is surrounded by and supported by the broad ligament. So in this diagram, we have here the BL here stands for the broad ligament, and we have here the uterine horn. The UH is the uterine horn, and we have here the ovary and the oviduct. So this portion here represents the broad ligament. So the broad ligament is divided into three portions. We have the mesometrium, shown in this figure, the mesosalpinx, and the mesovarium. So when we say mesometrium, that supports the broad ligament, that is the broad ligament that supports the uterus. So of course, this is the uterus. No? The uterus, we have the horn there, no? And of course, in this portion, we have here the oviduct, and the ovary. So again, the mesometrium is the one that supports the uterus. We also have the mesosalpinx, it is the one that supports the oviduct, and the mesovarium, the ovary. So the ovary is considered to be the primary sex organ of a cow, and of course of female animals. And the main function of the ovary is that it will produce the two major hormones of the reproductive tract. We have the estrogen and the progesterone. Aside from this, this is the endocrine function of the ovary. It also has a gametogenic function because it produces the oocyte or the female gamete. So this structure here represents the ovary of a cow. In the cow, it is easy to see the two major structures on the ovary. These are the follicle. So this one here represents the follicle. And we also have here the corpus luteum or the CL. So corpus luteum singular and corpus lutea when it is plural. So the follicle contains the oocyte and releases the hormone estrogen. The corpus luteum, on the other hand, releases the hormone progesterone. So this is the picture showing the corpus luteum that is incised. This diagram shows the schematic diagram of an ovary. So as you can see here, a typical ovary is divided into the cortex and the medulla. So outer yung cortex and the inner medulla. So the medulla is mainly composed of a connective tissue and the blood vessels, and the nerves enter the ovary through the hilus. And we also have the transverse medulla to the cortex. The cortex is the main functional area of the ovary and performs the gametogenic and the endocrine functions of the ovary. So again, when we say gametogenic function, it is where the oocyte will develop via the follicles. And when we say endocrine function, it is where the hormones are produced, progesterone and estrogen. The outermost layer of the ovary retains the name of the germinal epithelium. So we have here the germinal epithelium, even though it is no longer capable of being germinal. So under the germinal epithelium is the a layer of connective tissue known as the tunica albuginea. So this tunica albuginea is analogous to the connective tissue covering the testes. The tunica albuginea is a layer of connective tissue or condensed fibrous tissue that surrounds the surface of the ovary. This diagram shows a cross-section of the ovary showing the different developmental stages of the follicle, as well as the different developmental stages of the ovulated follicle, and that is the represented here by the corpus hemorrhagicum, CL, and the corpus albicans. So what are the different gametogenic structures that can be found in the surface or in the cortex of the ovary? So of course we have here the follicles. So in different developmental stages, of course we have the primordial follicle. When we say primordial follicle, that is a resting oocyte, which is surrounded by flattened follicle cells. So yung primordial follicle, it contains the oocyte within it and the follicle cells surrounds the oocyte. So this is the resting period of the oocyte. After the primordial follicle, so it will develop into a primary follicle. So in this follicle, the oocyte is surrounded by a single layer of follicle cells, and the follicle cells are cuboidal in shape. And we also have the secondary follicle. So the primary follicle becomes the secondary follicle. So the secondary follicle is characterized by the presence of the oocyte with a zona pelucida and two or more layers of granulosa cells. So these cells here are referred to as the granulosa cells. And after that, now the secondary follicle becomes a tertiary follicle or the Graafian follicle. So the other name of the tertiary follicle is Graafian follicle. And this follicle is basically characterized by the presence of the antrum, which is a fluid-filled structure of the follicle. We have here the oocyte, and we have here the presence of the granulosa cells. So as you can see in the figure, the Graafian follicle ruptures, no, or ovulates to release the oocyte, and later on, this ruptured follicle becomes a corpus hemorrhagicum, then it becomes a corpus luteum and a corpus albicans. So Again, this is the diagram of the cortex of the ovary, or the cross section of the ovary, showing the development of the, we have here the primary follicle. So a group of primary follicle is known as the egg nest, and the primary becomes a secondary, and it becomes a tertiary, and of course we have here a smaller tertiary follicle, then a larger one, and later on it ruptures and it ovulates, to become this structures here. So these arrows here, the red arrows here, signifies that not all of the follicles will develop, into a mature follicle and become ovulated. So not all of the follicles will undergo ovulation or release a oocyte or mature ovum. So in this case, for example, the primary follicle, tertiary follicle, secondary follicle, and tertiary follicle will, some of them will become atretic. No? So the follicles can be classified as normal or healthy, or as atretic. So these are atretic follicles. It signifies that not all of the growing follicles will ovulate, and most of them actually will regress or will undergo atresia. So atretic follicles are follicles that are degenerating, usually due to insufficient or improper hormonal support. Of course, the estrogen, is important for the development of follicles, and when there is insufficient or improper hormonal support, so that is one of the factors that will lead to the development of the atretic follicles. So this diagram shows the different developmental stages of a follicle. So of course it starts with the primordial follicle, then the primary follicle, secondary, and tertiary, or the graphene follicle. So again, when we say primordial follicle, it is composed of course, the oocyte within it, a resting oocyte, with flattened follicle cells of one layer of flattened follicle cells. For the primary follicle, these are follicle cells with one layer, but the follicle cells are cuboidal or square in shape. For the secondary follicles, of course, it is composed of multiple layers of follicle cells. And for the tertiary follicle, it is differentiated by, of course, the presence of the antrum. So this is the antrum, a fluid-filled part of the tertiary follicle, with differentiated layers of follicle cells. So mas ano na siya, mas madami na yung follicle cells that surrounds the, for example, the oocyte. Structures that can be found in a follicle um, is the zona pellucida. So in this diagram, now we have here a structure, showing the follicle cells. So this one in blue here is the follicle cells, and of course this is the oocyte, or the ovum, or the ova. And these cells here represents the comylus cell, and we have here yung blue one here represents the zona pellucida. So when we say zona pellucida, that is a non-cellular layer surrounding the oocyte made of glycoproteins. Its role is important because it plays a role in fertilization and cleavage. So this diagram is a sequence of early events in the mammalian fertilization. So as you can see here, we have here the sperm, the spermatozoa that undergoes capacitation. And of course, this is important to penetrate, the ovum, during fertilization process. So this structure here is already an ovulated follicle, or an ovulated oocyte. Nag-ovulate na siya. It has already been released. And again, it is surrounded here by the comylus cell and the zona pellucida. So this one here, the zona pellucida, needs to be penetrated by the capacitated sperm, in order for fertilization to take place. Again, the zona pellucida starts to form at the level of at the stage of the secondary follicle. So this is a closer look of the tertiary follicle or the graphene follicle. So these are the structures that can be found in the tertiary follicle. So we'll start with the center. Of course, we have the oocyte, and surrounding the oocyte is the zona pellucida, no, and the corona radiata. So when we say corona radiata, that is a single layer of columnar cells that surrounds the oocyte and penetrating the zona pellucida. Its role is important in providing nutrients for the oocyte and regulating the maturation of the oocyte. We also have cumulus oophorus. So this portion here is the cumulus oophorus. It is a mass of cells by which the oocyte sits and is shed with the egg at ovulation. It plays a role in fertilization and egg transport. Um, the tertiary follicle can be differentiated because it has an antrum, and the antrum contains the follicular fluid. The fluid is secreted by the granulosa cells, and the fluid contains concentrations of steroids or estrogen and glycosaminoglycans. Its role is important during ovulation. These structures here represents the granulosa cells, and these are considered to be multiply. These cells multiply rapidly during follicular growth, and they secrete follicular fluid and produce estrogen. Before ovulation, the granulosa cells produce again estrogen, and after ovulation, it forms the bulk of the Cl that produce progesterone. After that is the basement membrane, and after the basement membrane is the theca interna. The theca interna is also important for the production of estrogen. And after that, we also have the theca externa. Another diagram of the tertiary follicle showing the different parts of the tertiary follicle. Of course, its most prominent part is the the antrum, no, that contains the follicular fluid, and of course we have here the oocyte surrounded by the cumulus oophorus. The tertiary follicle will be the one to later on it will rupture and it will undergo ovulation. So the ovulation is a process whereby the mature ovum will be released, no, from the ovary. So of course this occurs mostly, no, during estrus. So the ovulated follicle or the ruptured follicle will later become the corpus hemorrhagicum. Then after that, now it will become corpus luteum and corpus albicans. So the corpus lutea or the corpus luteum deserves a special mention because they are prominent structures on the ovary and because they play an important role in sexual cycle and in pregnancy. So the life cycle of the corpus luteum corpus is encompassed in the following terms. Now we have the corpus hemorrhagicum. So of course when we say corpus hemorrhagicum, that is the bloody appearing structure formed from the freshly ovulated follicle and found from 1 to 3 days after ovulation. So this is ovulation. So after that, the ruptured follicle will become corpus hemorrhagicum. Then after that, it will later become the corpus luteum, no, through the process of luteinization. So mag-form siya ng corpus luteum. So when we say corpus luteum, that literally means yellow body. It is an endocrine gland with a limited lifespan that produces progesterone. After that is the corpus albicans. It is a pale white, yellow, or brown structure that is left when the corpus luteum regresses. It is mostly connective tissue and serves no known function. This diagram shows the blood supply to the follicle. So the blood supply does not pass the basement membrane in the tertiary follicle. So this is the tertiary follicle. It contains the theca interna cells, and within the theca interna cells are the blood supply or the capillary network to the follicle. So as you can see here, we have here the basement membrane, and again the blood supply that will not pass the basement membrane in this tertiary follicle. So again, the granulosa cells produce the hormone, no, estrogen, and the hormones in the follicular fluid from the granulosa cells must diffuse out and then be picked up by the blood that flows through the capillary network around the theca cells.